Welcome. I'm so excited to see everyone. I want to start really quickly with a couple of questions for you. How many of you know that there is an issue of hunger on our college campuses? Raise your hand. How many of you know that we have an issue of homelessness on our college campuses? So I'm going to tell you a quick story. In 2011, I took a job at Oregon State University looking at an office that was designed by students to serve other students who were dealing with issues of poverty, hunger, homelessness, and food insecurity. I myself had lost my job in the recession. I'd been living in my car. I was a student affairs practitioner. I had a master's degree, and I really didn't expect that was something that was going to happen to me. And yet here I was, and I really needed a job. And so I took this job, and on my first day on the job, I was standing in the basement of a condemned residence hall that had been turned into an office building, because that's what we like to do a lot of times with our residence halls. And I was training on the USDA civil rights so that I could deliver food at a food pantry. And I'm standing there with my student, and I'm watching students coming in the door. I'm watching them get food, and I'm watching them walk out as I'm getting this training. I'm having a really hard time focusing, because that was the moment that I realized that these students were hungry, they were on my campus, and it was my job to be serving them. And I'd already signed on the dotted line. It really didn't sink in until that moment. And so I went out and I started looking for research, because I really kind of felt like I was out there. I didn't really know what I needed to do. I didn't know how to serve these students. They did not teach this to me in student affairs school. So I went out and I started looking, and I started hunting through all the different things that I could find. I found 2 journal articles at the time. One was in Australia and one was written in Hawaii. Go Hawaii for being awesome and ahead of all of this. And yet the sample sizes were small, the findings weren't necessarily useful to me, and what I realized was, if somebody is going to do something about this, maybe it's going to have to be me. So I went and I did something that I really never thought I was going to do in my life. I put in to get some professional development funding to go to a conference and present. And my hope was, if I went and presented, I would draw in people that knew about this issue too, and I would be able to connect with them. I was at a 6,000 person conference. 4 people came to my session. Not a one of them had heard of this issue. 2 of them came to argue with me. So the fact that I am here and I'm looking at this room, and as many people out there have their hands raised, I'm going to ask another question of you. How many of you have a food pantry on your campus? How many have emergency aid programs on your campus? How many of you have caseworkers or social workers on your campus? This many hands would not have gone up in the room 6 years ago. And that's really exciting to me. It's really exciting to me because our students are dealing with some things. And we need to understand their issues, and we need to think about how we're going to go about addressing them. And I'm going to share some numbers with you. My colleagues at the Wisconsin Hope Lab did a survey. They do it every year. And this year, we were able to actually include both 2- and 4-year institutions. There were 66 schools, 43,000 students took part in the study. It was a national study. We found that 36% of students at 4-year institutions and 42% at community colleges were food insecure in the last 30 days. 36% of 4-year institutions and 47% of community college institutions or community college students were housing insecure in the past year. And we found that 9% of university students and 12% of community college students had been homeless in the past year. These are not great numbers. I'm not excited about them. I will say that we were very pleased when we got these numbers, because they have been consistent with the studies that the Hope Lab has done for the last 3 years and with other studies across the country. So we can say with confidence, unfortunate confidence, that this is an issue on our campuses and that we need to think about how to address it. So going back to my 4-person session, I walked out of there feeling pretty crappy. because I really didn't quite know what to do. And I spent some time thinking about what it is that students need. And I realized that really what I needed to do was I needed to talk to them. I needed to go out and I needed to talk to the students. And what I found was the students were well aware of what was going on. As a matter of fact, when I went back from my conference and I walked in the door, I actually had student workers working for me. I walked in the door and I said, hey everybody, I went to talk about this with college administrators. Nobody came and nobody cared. And one of my students looks at me and goes, no crap. She didn't say crap. But I feel like maybe I should censor myself in this room. And I said, well, okay, well then what do we need to do? They said, well, we're doing it. We're actually engaged in this, we're actually doing it. So let's figure out what we need to do next. See, at Oregon State, the students have a long history of thinking about this. And what I've learned from them is that what we need to do is really listen. We need to think about what the students want, we need to ask them, and we need to hear what they have to say. And when we looked at that survey and we got those numbers, we asked those students some other things as well. We didn't just ask them, are you food insecure? We didn't just ask them, are you housing insecure? Because when all we do is share the data that presents the problems students are facing, then we start to paint students as problems. So we also asked them questions about their academic effort. We asked them about their classes. We asked them about how much time they were spending. And what we found was that these students were, at minimum, working as hard as their peers. They were also working off campus more than their peers. And yet they were having more challenges in the classroom, and their grades were suffering for it. So these students whose lives were extremely hard were working extremely hard, and it was still harder for them than for their peers. And George mentioned earlier, he kind of posed the question, are students dropping out because maybe they aren't seeing the point? And I would argue that these students in particular, they really are. They see the point, they're grasping for it, and they often aren't able to reach for it. They aren't able to get their hands on it, but they're trying. There have been a lot of different programs that have come up since then. So as I was trying to figure out how I can get a room of 4 to a room where a lot of people have their hands raised, one of the things I did was start to search. And I found one colleague at Michigan State University who was running a food pantry there. And we got together and we said, you know what, we're gonna just try and keep finding people. So we kept reaching out, and what we ended up finding was 15 people that were really interested in campus food pantries, not because they were running them, but because they wanted to learn from Nate and I. And we started the College and University Food Bank Alliance. And we started to offer capacity building supports and services for students. And we were helping them to develop these programs, and we started to grow. And from 2012, when we opened, to today, we've gone from 15 institutions to almost 650. And we've rescoped, thank you. We've rescoped our work to include not just food pantries, but also food vouchers, food scholarships, and a number of other things that are addressing food insecurity. And I'll talk a little bit about why in a second. But in that time frame, the research has started to flow. As I said, my colleagues at the Wisconsin Hope Lab picked this up and started trying to measure how many students are food insecure, how many students are housing insecure. And at the same time, students were taking action. A group of students at UCLA started a program called Swipe Out Hunger. Anybody have a Swipe Out Hunger program on their campus? Great. Campus Recovery, Food Recovery Network, Campus Kitchens. These are all programs that were started by students. Holla for Hunger, the National Student Coalition Against Hunger and Homelessness. So when we talk about this movement, there are a lot of us that aren't students that are involved with this. But students have been at the heart and the front edge of this movement. And so if you're a student, it's important to be engaged and pay attention. And if you work with students, it's important to listen, and it's important to get out of their freaking way. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways to address these issues. I've mentioned a couple. Additionally, students are helping each other prepare their taxes and helping each other get tax refunds. And then they're partnering with their campus and their financial aid officers, and they're turning those tax refunds into FAFSA applications so that we can get students the financial aid as well. We have emergency aid and completion grants, and we're starting to see campuses do engaged partnerships with housing authorities, with food banks, to create programs where the campus is the content expert in the students, and the organization is the content expert in that form of poverty alleviation. And I say poverty alleviation because I think the P word isn't said enough when we think about these issues and we talk about our students. So I was going to talk about lessons learned, but I actually spent some time reading this great booklet. So I'm actually going to talk a little bit about how these 4 pieces here. It says, the best civic learning and democratic engagement efforts are likely to be integral, relational, organic, and generative. Because too often civic learning and democratic engagement can be categorized as celebratory, episodic, marginal, and scripted. And I'll tell you right now, one lesson that I've learned is that people will see it as those 4 things if you don't make sure they understand that it's one of these other 4. And I literally one time had somebody pat me on the head, physically pat me on the head and tell me, bless you for helping these poor needy students. We need to think about that, and we need to realize it. So what's important? It needs to be integral. When we address these issues, we need to think about this across the entire fabric of the campus. These programs, these offices, these services need to be well advertised, they need to be well known, and they need to become a core value of the institution. And they need to be as normal to access as any other service or support that's on the campus, so that students have no fear of walking in the door and saying, hi, I need food, I need housing, I need help trying to figure out how to pay my bills. It needs to be relational. We need to make sure we have strong partnerships. These partnerships need to be between students and leadership on the campus, because these integrated services are only truly going to happen when that partnership exists. And those partnerships need to happen on and off campus. Like I said, we aren't necessarily in higher ed content experts in how to feed people. If we can talk to those content experts, they can teach us and we can teach them. That organic nature of this movement is still really happening. And it's a great time to get involved. It's bittersweet. I wish we didn't have to. But right now, we are in the process of innovating. And the students are still the heart of it. And then finally, it does need to be generative. It's really important for us to collect data, to look at our data, to think about our data. And we need to not just look at the statistics, but we need to think about the stories, the students and their faces behind those, because our campuses aren't necessarily designed for these students. And if we truly want to redesign higher ed so that maybe these students come to the campus and get immediately what they need, they don't have to raise their hands, we really do need to be able to do some sort of iterative process. I really appreciate your time, and I am really looking forward to the other folks that are following me. If you want to come and chat, I would love to chat with you about this, and thank you so much.